personally, Brother Gonzalez, I don't know about you, but personally, I like to study. I like to study. I like to learn. I like to see things. And so, preparing for a Sunday morning, Doug, I hate to say this, but it's almost kind of fun. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I have to be made to do it. Responsibility makes me do it. Sometimes fear makes me do it. But it's one of those things, when you're doing it, you wonder, like, why did I put this off, or why do I resist this sometimes? Because I like to learn. I like to look in the book and it make me see Jesus. It makes things possible. It makes me see me. And I enjoy all of those things. But the hardest thing for me is after you finish a study to start a new one. Because, Brother Wayne, it's easy to know we finished at verse 8. Verse 9 is where we start this next time. But when you finish a passage, and Brother Rick, you're like, okay, where do we go now? Well, that is really where it gets tough for me. And so this week, after finishing a long study, I didn't want to jump right into another one. Because, Doug, to jump into another one, there needs to be some preparation. You'd have to do some background study on the book. And I just didn't feel ready to do that. I didn't get that built up. So I didn't want to jump right into another long study. And I also felt like I just wanted to be encouraging. I mean, look at the times that we're in, and I want to find a passage that allows us to be, really encouraging, but at the same time dealing with the things that we're living through. And Matt, so the first thing I thought is, well, let's go to Lamentations, because everything has fallen down and everything was destroyed. And so I started to work in there a little bit. And I'm going to have to put some background in this. Because you got to at least review and set up Jeremiah. And it's been a couple years since we went through the book of Jeremiah. And Brother Hank, it would have been a little bit of a struggle for me to make Lamentations encouraging. Now, I do believe it is exactly that. But you do have to set that up. So instead, I started spending some time on because that was my focus. That was, the Lamentations, the walls have fallen down, society's been destroyed. And I started to look at, in 3 years, in just a short period of 3 years, we have seen the walls of our society kind of crumble. Now, it happened so fast, we look at it, it's just like the new normal. But Rob, things are way different today than they were just 3 years ago. And these are just some of the things I put down. There has been a huge moral shift in our country. It went from a basis in God to a basis in me. And someone could argue and say, well, Brother Jeremy, that's been happening for a long time. Okay, I'll just use this as an illustration. I agree it's been happening for a long time. It's been happening for a long time since the garden. But, prior to very recently, if a politician wanted to be elected, they found some way to say, I believe in God, I go to church, I'm a Christian. That's not even needed anymore. In fact, it's almost mocked and demeaned. And now, if they do, they hide it. There has been this huge shift. All the conversation is about me or you. It literally is not what's right for our country or what's best in this scenario. Or, Brother Wayne, it's what's best for you. Vote for me, I'll give you what's best for you. And the entire shift has been to a me-based situation. And so this political shift has gone from, protect my opportunities. Just give me opportunity. Protect my opportunities to provide for me. The whole purpose is, now I'll provide for you. The job is to give you lifestyle. And this is just a huge change. The news is full of conflicts, of battles, of unrest. Unrest in all different kind of situations. There's economic unrest. I read this week that inflation is up 3.2% since Biden took office. And that's really not bad because our wages have increased more than that. Interest itself is pushing 7% and was under 1. Just the prime interest rate has gone up 6%. Now, I don't know a whole lot about business, although I work in it. But when businesses want to increase, they usually don't have those funds. They go and get a loan for those funds. They're now paying 7% interest minimum back on those loans, which before they were paying under 1. So just interest has gone up 6%. I don't know how anybody believes it's only gone up 3.2%. I guess they don't buy gas or anything else in the store. But there is huge economic unrest. There is racial unrest, which, I mean, if you want to hold on to how I was mistreated at some point, anybody can do that for any reason. Brother Wayne, you want me to tell you how I was treated when I was 4 years old? When I was 4 years old, one time I had a teacher, I'm sure, I don't even know her name and can't remember, who treated me unfairly. And for that, I mean, but that really has become the basis of our society. How do you fix that? It becomes so depressing. There's social unrest. Companies are abandoning huge cities in America. Now, I don't know much about this guy. Donnie, I don't know much about this guy. But I know enough to know that he was tied up with the gangs, and he was a huge rapper, and that he was instrumental in the 80s with the anti-police movement, especially in LA. His name was Ice-T. He's transitioned over to being an actor. And, you know, he was this huge rebellious figure back in the in the mid-'80s, early '90s. Man, I heard him just this week. YouTube's great for the little blips, you know. I get so smart. As soon as I look him up, no, that one's not true. No, that one's not. But anyway, I looked this one up. It's true. Ice-T said, I'm moving out of L.A. because L.A. is too dangerous. I went back and looked up Ice-T's biggest hits, and I now know why L.A. is too dangerous. But whole cities are being abandoned. I mean, they're just writing them off. And Rob, 3 years ago, I would not have expected that in our country. I would not expect the pictures I see from Portland or from Seattle. I mean, you basically have just zones that are zoned off. It's like Escape from New York. These areas you leave alone. That's an 80s movie. And on top of all of that, you can't really talk about anything. Because if we start to talk about anything, it's hate speech or bullying. So, Doug, I'm thinking, how do we deal with this? Everyone's a victim. Everyone is owed a better life. Here's your rights. Your rights are to a better life. I'm owed a better life. And the only choice given today really seems to be like you either affirm the victimhood or you hate them. And that's a problem for a Christian because we're not supposed to hate, nor can we affirm. I mean, our only choice is to love and respect and to warn. We have to disagree. And you know, if you start talking about consequences for your decisions, I really do think it's because of this that many churches have moved from being all about God and all about the Word to being all about the people in the congregation. The comments are, we want to feed you, we want to grow you, we want to nurture you. We don't ever talk about God. It's let me better you, because that almost fills the dynamic of our time. And so I started looking at this, and there's on top of all of this, Brother Hank, there's personal burdens. Because in the middle of all of this mess, there's loss of security and relationships that are a mess and jobs that are either lost or transitioning, or you're just scared to death that they're going to be lost. He says, not me, I retired. There's sickness. There's buying power, because that's all gone with our 3.2%, the inflation. There's fear, and I'm just like, where is peace? Where is the hope in this? There's got to be people who are saying, this is not what I signed on for. It's supposed to be different than this. And so I said, Matt, now you see, that's just hopeless. That's why when I started thinking like this, I said, first thing popped in my head is, let's go to Lamentations. But then I went there. So I said, let's do this. We just read last week about all the things Paul went through. But Paul's also the same one who says, I finished my course, I've kept the faith. So, Doug, I said, I've never done this ever. Well, maybe a little bit with David. But I've never really done a study on a biblical person. Why don't I just do a study on Paul? We know a lot about Paul. We know a lot about David. We know a lot about Moses. We know a lot about Joseph. There aren't very many people we know a lot about. This is one we could do. We could do a study on Paul. And so, Brother Maury, that's where I started looking at a study on Paul. And then I decided it takes like 4 weeks to even get prepared to start to do a study on Paul. Or you can really get some things out of whack in the beginning. But in this study, Rob, I said, I had this question. Yes, Paul is one who finished the course. And that's a great picture to have at the end. If you did a study on Paul, that has to be where you end up. He finished the course. And he's got a prize waiting. So you'd have to end up there. And it's easy to know where you begin, because you would begin on the Damascus Road. So in between the two, the real question was, what keeps Paul on that road? But Doug, that's really what I was looking for. What keeps Paul on that road to where he goes from that Damascus road and he ends up saying, I finished? And I think Paul tells us that. And that's in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. So I went to 2 Corinthians 5, and this is where I think we'll spend probably 7-8 weeks of study just going through 2 Corinthians chapter 5, because I think if there is a key to the life of Paul that gets him from point A to point B, it's going to be this: the love of Christ constraineth me. I mean, there was just no other option. And so I went to chapter 5, and that's where I started to look. But when you go to chapter 5, that's a verse in chapter 5. To study that in context, there's a lot of things before it. And so that's where we're going to start this morning. And I'd like to start actually in chapter 4. And this is where we get our picture. Chapter 4, verse 1, therefore, seeing we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we faint not. And then you can go to verse 16, for this cause we faint not. But though our outward man perish, yet our inward man is renewed day by day. This is the picture that I want to talk about. So if the question being this, how do I live in a world that, Brother Moore, how do I live in a world that is just this trying, taxing, messed up, depressing? How do I live in this world alert? Because I can give you one answer right away. You know how you live in this world without being depressed and taxing? You live ignorant. You hide your eyes. You be an ostrich. You stick your head in the sand. And I know a lot of people who do that. Okay, I just want to not know anything about anything that's going on. Well, I'm going to tell you, it's really hard to be ready to give every man an answer if you don't know what they're dealing with or what their challenges are. I'll tell you right now, one of the big challenges every kid 22 to 30 years old is dealing with, are there aliens? They're all running around with aliens. There's all this big talk about aliens. Let me tell you, that's something you stick your head in the sand, or that's a great opportunity to witness, if you're prepared. And so, but how do we live in this world alertly and not lose heart? How do I deal with pressures and not be overwhelmed? How do I see this evil and not get discouraged? Because that's what Paul says. We faint not in verse 1, in verse 16. For this cause we faint not. Well, how does he go through and faint not? And the key is in 16 through 18, he gives us 3 contrasts. Now, I'm going to tell you this too. Matt, I like Paul. In the New Testament, Paul's my favorite person to study, to read. That's because I like the way he thinks. Paul is normally an attorney, and he goes, A, B, C, D, therefore, E must be true. He thinks like a mathematician. I mean, just stop and think of the great therefores in the New Testament, and most of them Paul wrote. And they're conclusionary statements. This passage is a little bit different for Paul. In this passage, he gives us the conclusions first, and then he develops them. The conclusions we're going to read in chapter 4. That's why we're reading in chapter 4. Here's going to come conclusions. There's 3 contrasts. These contrasts are what keeps us from fainting not. But then all of chapter 5 develops those 3 points. So it's a little bit backwards. And, that's another thing that caught my attention. But here they are, verse 16. And notice the three contrasts. For which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. Verse 17, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Verse 18, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So here's the three contrasts. He contrasts the outer self in verse 16 with the inner self. The outer self perishes, it fades away, it weakens. The inner self is renewed. We get no picture of weaken. We get no picture of fading away. The inner man is renewed. Verse 17, there's a present affliction, which it talks about light or momentary or short. Yes, there's a present affliction, but that's contrasted with a far more exceeding. I don't even know what that means when you're trying to talk about what heaven compared to now. But I know this. It's far more exceeding eternal weight of glory. So the comparison is there. And then in verse 18, he compares what is seen, which is passing, to what is unseen, which lasts forever. So here's the conclusions. And this is what I mean, Brother Hank. This is a conclusionary statement. So that's it. Brother Hank, don't faint. We're dealing with the outer self, which talks about pressures and stress and just life today, and we're dealing with the present affliction, which is the circumstances that bring those pressures, and we're dealing with the discouragement that comes from the watch of the compromise and the conflict and the destruction of right. And I mean, we have what is even justice today in our country? I mean, when you start to look at these, when we just see evil. What is just in our country? We can't even decide what a man and a woman is. And I'm not trying to be funny about that. I mean, if you're getting to that core and at that level, things are being so distorted. Or that's discouraging. And the answer, don't lose heart. Don't faint. Outward, inward. And it makes me ask the questions, but how do I not quit? How is the inner man being renewed? And how does this eternal weight of glory change me? And what about, what is the unseen I'm supposed to fix my eyes upon? Because this is the answer. But like I said, it's unlike Paul. It's the answer in the beginning. He's going to go on and develop that answer in chapter 5. And so that's where we are. We actually have two thoughts out on that we're not going to get to. Somebody asked me, are you going to finish today? I said, yes. Because nobody knows where I'm supposed to end. Second Corinthians chapter 5, we'll read the first 5 verses. And the first thought we'll try to get out there is just the reality of the Christian life in this world. Because sometimes it's not what we make it. And we get a good picture of it right here. Chapter 5, verse 1, for we know that if, and that's a big if right there. It tells us something about Paul's heart. We'll come back to it. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For we that are in his tabernacle do groan, being burdened. Not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. It's a great phrase right there. I'm hoping that mortality might be swallowed up of life. That real life comes and takes away all of this burden. That life swallows up this mess, and I'm now in life. That's this picture he's painting right there. Now he that hath wrought us for the self same thing is God, who hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. The first thought I want to throw out is this, the reality of the Christian life in this world. Paul often writes about the soul or the spirit. We just left Ephesians where he's talking about the inner man and strengthening in the inner man. Donnie, there's much written, but it's a spiritual battle. But here it's the exact opposite. He's writing about the body. Here he's writing about the physical. This is what he starts with right here. And he tells us this, the body is the house. You have a house. That's your body. Now, what kind of house is this body? Because inside the body is the eternal. Inside the body is the soul. Inside the body is the spirit. Inside the body, But the body is a house. So what does this house look like? Well, this house is a tent. And there's a huge application from this idea. The house is not a fortress. It's not a palace. It's not a city with high walls. It's a tent. And Paul was a tent maker. He would know what he's writing about. Okay, it's a tent. It's canvas and ropes and some wooden poles and maybe a peg or two. That's your house. That's your body. When we take a look at our life now, we live in a tent. It's adequate. It does its job, but it's fragile. And it's temporary. Matt, ropes fray. They break. Canvas wears. Stick it in the sun. Then snap it. It doesn't last forever. Wood, step on it. Now you're trying to find a way to hold that tent up. And we know this. In our body, our muscles weaken. Our bones lose density. Rob, I'm going through this. I have memory loss. It's easy, too, because I can just get told, I used to be smarter. Even at least in my own mind, which now I'm not really sure is going on. We have cognitive decline. I mean, that's just factual. It happens. I don't want to talk about any of these very long, but, you know, our hair goes away, our teeth weaken, we lose hearing. Justin and I read about this. I love this, actually. There is, you know, I guess by the age of 22, we have already lost so much hearing that you cannot hear a certain high pitch. Cool. Whatever, I don't hear it, doesn't bother me. Matt, this is what I read. I read that in some European countries, they are developing this broadcast, which they put around buildings and, you know, in large shopping centers, where it just broadcasts this annoying high-pitched sound that no one over 22 can hear, just to try to control the young people or the amount of young people in the crowd. Like, oh, that's brilliant, since I'm not 22 anymore. But, I mean, we lose hearing. Eyesight declines. Like ropes. Our bodies have limits. We have breaking points. There's a dose of reality. Our bodies are only tents in this world. We only live in tents. You're like, of course, we know that. But we don't always live that way. You know, we get discouraged over the littlest thing. Our bodies are only tents. It's a fact. Why are we getting discouraged when we realize our bodies are only tents? Verse 2, verse 4, they also make this statement. For in this tent, we groan. Verse 4, for we that are in this tabernacle do groan. In this tent, there's some struggles. There's some burdens. My dad was not a camper. I always wanted to go camping. I went camping one time with my uncle. It was the greatest thing ever. We went to Northern California. We were living in Arizona. We went to Northern California. We had tents. We got it out. The weather was great. Everything was wonderful. So I just keep wanting to go camping. Well, my dad got smart. He bought us little two-man tents that are good for one man. So I made my brother sleep outside. But he bought us two-man tents, said, go set this thing up outside. You can sleep in the backyard. You can sleep in the backyard as long as you want to. Doug, it was July. We lived in Sierra Vista, Arizona. That is desert. That is snakes and scorpions and tarantulas, desert. I mean, we're 88, 89, 90 degrees sometimes at night. Unless you're in the rainy, where it's, 98 during the day and then 50 at night. And that much of a drop, you're freezing. So you're either roasting or freezing. It took me like 2 days to realize I don't like camping all the time. Camping's not always great. And that's the thing. But Wayne, you live in tent. And sometimes it's not always great. Sometimes we groan. I'm gonna give you some of my, this is me. Ray Jr., this is me when I was a junior. When I still had hair, and my teeth were strong, and my bones didn't go away, and my memory was still okay. Well, this would have been my thought. Okay, I would have sat right there and said, all right, well, Brother Jeremy, what if you were more godly? If you were more godly, then maybe things wouldn't be so frail, and the circumstances wouldn't affect you so much, and sadness wouldn't have you in this direction. And you know what? But if you prayed more, or if you had more faith, or if you studied more, then you would not be in this position. Now, I wouldn't have said that out loud because I was respectful. I would have kept it inside my heart and just thrown darts from the seat back there. But now I'm old, so I read the next verse. And I don't think that many people had more faith or prayed more or studied more than the Apostle Paul. I don't think so. I wouldn't argue with it. If you want to stand up and say, I do, have at it. But I think Paul says, I groan. We groan. We groan in this tent. Sometimes we groan. But the Apostle Paul also says, I faint not. We're all going to face burdens in this life. Sickness and evil and struggle. And this is humbling enough. But I'll give you the third thing about this tent. It says in verse 1, for we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved. You ready for the next? Brother Wayne, do you remember when I said I wanted to be encouraging? Okay, well, here we go. The next thing, this tent is going to be torn down. This tent is going to be dissolved. Brother Jeremy, you're not very good at encouraging. Well, wait, this is very important. Because I think this is one of the reasons we struggle so much. If we start thinking this life is going to be heaven on earth, if we forget that we live in a tent and we start to think we already live in a palace, if we think we're already in his room, then we're going to be disappointed and disillusioned all the time. So we have to remember, we live in tents. And there's going to come a time, like my dad did, he's going to force us to live outdoors. But, Brother Ray, those outdoors is just shedding this tent. And he covers that in this passage too. To be absent from the body, to be absent from that tent, is to be present with the Lord. It is very important, though, we understand, because if we start thinking that this life is going to be so easy and so smooth, and if I just do it all right, then everything's always going to be worked out, and it's going to be smooth, and it's going to be easy, and it's just going to be. Then we're missing verses that talk about tribulation and persecution and suffering and ridicule, because we're pretty much promised all of those things while we're in this tent. In fact, in Mark chapter 8, I think it's verse 34, but my memory just went. Christ would say, you want to follow me? Deny yourself and take up your cross. Now follow me. It is really hard to be a Christian when we get the Christian life confused with the American dream. Now, at one time they might have been similar, before my lifetime. But at one time they might have been similar because the American dream might have had some tie-in to surrender and obedience to the Lord at one time. That was a long time ago. And I'm going to tell you, the American dream has changed during my lifetime to now all it is I need to be happy at anyone else's expense. My children, my parents, my spouse. It does not matter. I just need to be happy. It's all about me. And if that's our life, we're going to be forever disappointed. Whatever the next thing is, if I just get this truck, no thing is satisfying. We were not created for things. We will be stuck forever saying, why me? Why do I have to suffer? Why is my life so hard? Well, the truth is we live in tents. Sometimes it rains. Sometimes it's cold. Sometimes it's hot. Not here, but sometimes it's cold. We get some snow. Christian life is tent living. And first, we have to understand that. It is tent living. It is not palace living. And the second thing I believe it shows us right here is that, man, I don't know if you know this, but every Christian is a two-home owner. You already have two houses. One is a tent, and one is a building not made with hands. One is temporary, of ropes and poles and canvas, and the next is way more substantial. I wish I could describe it. Here's where things get a little challenging. I got to try to cut this down, but I do want to throw this out there. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, let me give you that if real quick because I ran over it. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, okay, if it fades away, if it's gone, when life passes, when you're separated, okay, if it happens, I think the Apostle Paul was forever hopeful that Christ would come back. That's why it's an if. Because if he would be, then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up. Paul never lost sight that it could be today. That's why it's an if. Because, Justin, it is an if. Anyway. Verse 2, for in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house, which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that which we could be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of his Spirit. So we've got this comparison of these two homes. The question becomes, Brother Pickles, what is the second home? And actually there are two answers. I obviously believe in one. I think they both could kind of fit, but one definitely fits better with the passage. And here's the two. So we have one temporary. That's ropes, poles, canvas. That's the body we're in today. The next is way more substantial, but it could be either of these. If it's life, then it's heaven itself. This home, this building not made with hands would be heaven itself. Or the comparison is, if it's the body, then we're talking about the resurrected body. Now, I'll tell you this. Back when I had my memory, I would have leaned on this being the resurrected body, the comparison of the body to the body. But I'm going to tell you, because of this passage, actually, when you study this passage a little bit more, I lean more towards the fact that this is talking about our life in heaven. And I'll give you a few thoughts why. And I do need to hurry with this. First, remember when he says, in my Father's house are many mansions? Okay, so here we're talking about a house not made with hands. There's a house for us, and where is this house? And in this passage he talks about to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Okay, well, Doug, I don't believe we get our new body until 1 John 3:2. It does not yet be what we shall be, but when we shall see him, when he appears, we'll be like him. Thessalonians 4:16, 17, 18, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Okay, we get our resurrected body then. But in this passage, absent from the body, absent from the tent, we're present with the Lord. There is no time passage. We're not waiting from one. We're not floating around there in nothingness. We are instantly moved out of one building into another building. And that's to be present with him. So I really wouldn't waste any time arguing about this. Because spiritual body, what a blessing. When we shall see him to be like him, Justin, what a blessing. But I even like better the idea I don't have to wait. I get this building not made with hands the minute I step into this home that is prepared for me. And as soon as I'm absent from the body, I'm in that present. And I guess you could break this down a little bit and look at all this. I'm never going to be unclothed. But when we look at it, the contrast, this is what we're talking about. Because we're talking about a tent, which is where we just lodge. We lodge in the tent. It's fragile. It breaks down. We're groaning in the tent. But then we move into this house not made with hands, and there we live. There we abide. That's not moving ever again. There it's enduring. There it's eternal. There mortality is swallowed up in life. All of these problems, all of these burdens, all of this groaning circumstances, they're all gone. Two things happen when a Christian dies. Two things. One, we abandon the tent. And that's a struggle. My dad was in the military. I moved a lot. I hated moving. You leave friends. You have so many new things to do. Here's the worst. Packing and unpacking. You have to pack up to move. It's the only time I want to throw everything away. Well, that's not true. When you have to unpack, why don't we just throw it away? It'll show you things aren't that important when you have to move. Moving is not fun. And then you have to, when we moved from Texas, man, that was the longest drive. But there are two things happen. One, you have to leave. You abandon the tent. And two, you have to move in. But let me tell you, this move in is instantaneous. And I don't bring any junk with me. No packing, no unpacking, no boxes, no baggage. It will be immediate. Now, however difficult it is to leave, and I don't want it to mean that, because it's hard to leave. No matter how difficult it is to leave, the moment we leave, we will be in the presence of God, who says he's prepared a place. We're out of time. But he says he's prepared it two ways. One, he prepared us for the place with the Holy Spirit. And two, Christ says, I go to prepare a place. He prepared the place for me in the ascension. The place is ready. And at one point, I get to move in. In the meantime, I live in a tent. But he says, let's keep some spiritual perspective. Doug, we close in a word of prayer this morning.